Hi, I'm Lowell Gustafson. I'd like to thank the organizers of the 2020 Globalistics Conference and the Fourth International Symposium on Big History and Global Evolution for this opportunity to discuss with you the idea of the future and a coming-of-age story. History is generally thought to be about the past. Traditionally, it's been about the human past, and the human past during the last few decades, centuries, or perhaps millennia, at least since the invention of writing. Traditional history often examines the origins and development of our class, nation, social group, culture, and so on. Big history has challenged that view of history, arguing that the study of the written record of the human past needs to be embedded within the natural record of the entire known past. We can only understand ourselves fully if we place ourselves within this much greater context. And so big history is defined by the International Big History Association as the search for an integrated history of the cosmos, Earth, life, and humanity, using the best available empirical evidence and scholarly methods. The definition is in response to questions that we all ask. Where did we humans come from? How did we get here? How did we get to be the way that we are? To answer those questions, we need to begin with the Big Bang almost 14 billion years ago, and then to go methodically through the major steps from then until we get to ourselves now. This long process allows us to place ourselves within universal development. Our own origins did not begin with writing. There have been a series of origins of matter, atoms, stars, galaxies, chemicals, terrestrial planets, single-celled life, increasingly complex life. Each one of those origins were a necessary part of the development if the past was eventually going to lead to humanity. This made big history not only an origin story, but also a coming-of-age story. Individual persons might be said to come of age in part when they begin to realize that it really is not all about themselves. Other people with their own ideas, emotions, memories, and hopes exist as well. A person comes of age when he or she recognizes the realities beyond oneself. Big history showed clearly that a long past of much that is not human existed and developed well before humanity, even though it was necessary for humanity. Compared to the cosmos, Earth, and life, all of which were necessary if we were to exist, humanity has been an extraordinarily late comer. And big history has forced us to pay attention to all of this that preceded humanity. The coming-of-age story is being reinforced by a reconsideration of the definition of big history and what it is the history of. With the history that has been discovered in recent years for thousands of exoplanets just in our own region of the Milky Way, we are well aware that our solar system is not the only one, and that Earth is not the only planet or habitable planet. Each one of these solar systems and planets has its own history. The study of astrobiology examines the building blocks of life in space and the potential for life and various forms of intelligence that exist on other planets, each of which have their own histories. It is hard for many to think that life must only mean life or intelligent life on Earth. With recent experiments suggesting that slime mold can solve mazes and learn from experience, we realize that looking for intelligence, even here just on Earth, as well as on other habitable planets, may be more varied than we had thought. Biologists have long recognized that the journey from the origins of life some 3.8 billion years ago does indeed eventually and rather recently lead to humanity, but it also leads to an enormous number of other life forms, each of which has its own evolutionary past. Even though the universe is homogeneous and isotropic in space and time on the large scale, there are great variations in types of galaxies, stars, planets, and life forms. Even on Earth, there is not a single path from the last universal common ancestor to only humanity. It is great fun to imagine what these extraterrestrial life forms might take on other planets. But beyond popular culture, evidence-based research permits big historians to increasingly consider how exoplanets, astrobiology, and evolution remind us not to develop a new chain of being, in which the main or even the only story worth telling about are the steps from the Big Bang to us now. Still, we are legitimately fascinated by ourselves, and we have good reason to ask about the many origins of humanity, the many thresholds or transitions that have occurred over almost 14 billion years as we move in steps from the Big Bang to ourselves. That by itself has been a huge change in how the academic discipline of history has understood itself. But big historians have challenged our thinking about time in other regards as well. They have long realized that what defines humanity is not only our questions about our own origins, where we come from, our past, but also about our future. From the beginning of big history, there has been a dissatisfaction that the past is only about the past decades, centuries, and millennia, or even only about humans. But big historians have also questioned that it is primarily or even exclusively about the past at all. Humans do not ask only about their origins that long preceded them. Humans do not ask only about how the past might shape the course of the human future. To be human is also to think ahead, to think about the future. Where are we going? Where's the rest of the cosmos going? The past and the future and the present have their own complex relationship. The term future history challenges the notion that history should think only about the past. The term was coined by John W. Campbell in the February 1941 issue of Astounding Science Fiction. It is arresting in that it juxtaposes future and history, future and the past, in a way that catches our interest. It points to something important, in that the study of history leads not only to a past event that might have an impact on the future, but to the study of the future itself, and how our thinking about the future may well impact how we remember the past. The two get a bit scrambled. Whatever we call deep time about both past and future, big historians have long concluded their publications not only with the past, but with the future. David Christian entitled his recent book An Origin Story, which has the view that history, quite rightly, that the past has in fact led to the present. But that book, like many others, ends with the chapter on the future. Where is this all going? Cynthia Brown did the same thing in her book on big history. In her first 12 chapters, she covered universal development from the Big Bang to the year 2000. But then she asks, what now? What next? And that's the final chapter of her book. In their major textbook on big history, Between Nothing and Everything, David Christian, Cynthia Brown, and Craig Benjamin again completed their text after 12 chapters about the past with a consideration of the future, both in its near term, the next few thousand years, and the very remote term until we get to the end of the story of humans and the cosmos. Fred Speer, in his classic text, Big History and the Future of Humanity, dealt in his first chapters again with all of the steps that led to the evolution of humanity, and then again in his final chapter completes his text with a discussion about the various pressing problems facing humanity, and if these problems here on Earth become so overwhelming, if we might be able to escape to another planet, which Professor Speer thinks is a rather unlikely possibility, at least in our own foreseeable future. The OER project, like many others in the field of big history, meld big history beginning 13.8 billion years ago and world history, which the OER begins in 1750, just a few centuries ago. Many big historians themselves came out of the tradition of world history, and both fields have long asked how the past is not only prologue to the present, but how it leads us in steps to the present and to us now. In their big history course, they take us along a rather familiar series of thresholds, and in the last part of section 7, they cast an eye towards the future. A future of the next few decades, the many problems facing humanity, and what we need to do to sustain life on Earth. In their world history course, taking us from 1750 to the present, the course concludes with the challenges facing contemporary globalization. This is the approach as well for the Museum of Tomorrow in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. Certainly by its name, we would understand the Museum of Tomorrow to be about the future. And it is, but it's presented within the tradition of big history. It begins with the wider context, placing the future as emerging from the deep past. The museum does this in a way that is familiar to big historians. It begins with the cosmos, and then Earth, and then life and us humans, to the period of time in which we now live, the Anthropocene. After considering a 13.8 billion year past, it investigates the future of the next 50 years at a series of problems which is threatening the well-being or perhaps even the survival of humanity. Some look forward to the future not by focusing on the threats facing humanity, but with considerably more optimism. Peter Diamandis sees a future of exponential change and abundance. The last couple of centuries show us that technology in the modern era has enjoyed great success in reducing the percentage of people living in poverty. The work of Hans Rosling on increasing lifespans, health, and incomes around the globe remains well worth considering in this regard. Ray Kurzweil has for many years been emphasizing how technology is transforming not only our present, but also our expectations for the future. Through it, we are creating an exponential increase in the rate of change. Humanity has named itself Homo sapiens, wise man, and thought that our brains were our defining characteristic. We observed that our 100 billion neurons with their trillion synapses were the most complex matter of which we know in the universe. But what if our own development of artificial intelligence produces computers that surpass not only our individual brains, but the collective learning capabilities of humanity? Will artificial intelligence not just do calculations that we program it to do, but learn from its own experience and develop its own emotions? It's the future of this singularity that Andrei Koryatov, David Lepore, and the others in their recent book focus on in their new volume. In it, they examine the future throughout the remainder of the 21st century. That is not merely the conclusion of their book. It is the principal focus of their investigation throughout it, even while it is placed within a big history context. Big history brings us from the cosmos to Earth to life to humanity. And now is humanity taking the story to the next chapter? Are we moving us through to a new threshold, a new transition from biology to technology? As lawyer Alan Dershowitz argues in a fictional court case in Ray Kurzweil's movie about Ramona, an artificially intelligent woman from the not-too-distant future, he says there is no reason to be fleshists and think that robots will be inferior to humans. In contrast to the idea that technology is increasingly going to lead us to an era of abundance, thinking about the future is often less optimistic. The future will not be transhuman as much as it will be post-human. We are not producing the technology that will become superior to us. We are producing the conditions that we may well not survive. The rise of temperatures that we have been causing throughout the industrial age may make life in many currently densely populated areas unsustainable even before this century is out. Elizabeth Kolbert won the Pulitzer Prize for her book about how we are currently driving untold numbers of species to extinction, and that perhaps we will be one of those species that's included in her story. A new climate clock has just been opened in Manhattan, and it is saying that, as of this reading, we have 7 years, 102 days, and 12 hours in order to prevent the effects of global warming from becoming irreversible. Whatever the exact number of days or hours or years are, it is certainly becoming so dire that some wonder if we are already doomed, and the only question is, well, now what? Our international accords seem to be quite toothless, and greenhouse gases just keep getting pumped into the atmosphere. It's time, perhaps, to think about how humanity itself will die, and for us to think about what comes after humanity. There are discussions about contemporary or near-term catastrophic events, but these raise a key component of our coming-of-age story. Individuals come of age not only when they recognize that other autonomous persons exist, but when it finally occurs to each of us that we are mortal, that we will at some point die. Even for those who are skeptical about the perennial warnings that the end is near, and even if the end of humanity is not imminent, the end will come at some point. We've only been around for some 300,000 years. Does anyone really think our species will survive until the sun's temperatures rise enough to evaporate the oceans in about 1 billion years, or turn the Earth into a crisp in about 5 billion? One of the defining questions of humanity is not only where did we come from, but what happens after we are gone. What happens to after my own personal death, and now what happens after humanity's extinction. Big historians consider the history and the future of the cosmos and all of its galaxies, Earth and other planets, life on Earth as well as elsewhere, humans and intelligence elsewhere on Earth and potentially on other planets. And now we consider a future of the Earth and the cosmos after humanity, after life on Earth. Big history has challenged the traditional historians to learn from the natural scientists and push their timelines back to 13.8 billion years ago. Astronomers like Katie Mack and others now incorporate into our narrative a future not only of the next decades, but of a deep future that may run even longer than our entire known past. Many are thinking about a future that will run for billions or tens of billions of years or more after humanity is history itself. In the big history narrative, we read with anticipation about each step that came before us over 13.8 billion years, because it all contributed to our being here now. We now are made of the quarks, the atoms, the chemicals, the cells, the organs that were billions of years in the making. We look back on each step with gratitude for what we have been given. After we are history, the Earth will have a long future. After Earth, other planets will have their own long futures. After life on Earth, life on other habitable planets will no doubt thrive and maybe fade. And it may well be that after our universe, there will be an infinite number of other universes that will be part of an infinite future. Can we take every step possible to prolong the marvel of life here and now that we have inherited, even as we do not deny that our own existence and that of our species will be followed by much else? Can we take as much delight in what will come after us as what led to us? Can we work to solve our near-term problems as best as we can, and also incorporate an analysis of the deep future, a future of abundant possibilities beyond humanity, in a coming-of-age story?